Have you ever wondered, what does it mean to be yellow? When I first saw this image in the gallery, I felt confronted by it. Its striking sense of ambivalence stood out to me. Two contradicting emotions rose in me. First, abjection, followed by identification. At first sight, it resembled an egg yolk, an embryo of something humanoid but not fully human, suspended in amniotic fluid. He seemed other, an aberration. As I looked closer, however, I realized this yellow body evoked a curious sense of sympathy and resonance in me, prompting my investigation. This photograph depicts Singaporean artist Lee Wen submerged in a tub, covered from head to toe in an intense yellow hue. The central figure is curled in a fetal position, his head turned away from the audience, and we, the audience, following the eye of the camera lens, and force our gaze upon this vulnerable yellow man. Who is this yellow man, and how do we see him? My name is Eunice, and today I will be discussing Journey of a Yellow Man, number 11, Multiculturalism by Lee Wen. As a local art student and aspiring artist myself, I am most interested in how Lee Wen uses the identity of the other in various spheres, racial, artistic, personal, and political, to disturb our view of multiculturalism in the local art scene and defend the importance of performance art as an alternative to traditional art forms, through the caricature of the yellow man. Journey of a Yellow Man, number 11, Multiculturalism in particular, is not so much about Lee Wen's identity, but rather an institutional critique of our Singaporean art scene and its obsession with multiculturalism, a state of society in which numerous distinct ethnic and cultural groups are seen to be politically relevant. While this may seem positive, this policy came at the cost of diversifying artistic expression beyond racial categories in Singapore. Thus, Lee Wen advocates for a broader conversation in our local art scene in response. Lee Wen is a local multidisciplinary artist best known for his performance series, Journey of a Yellow Man, first performed from 1992 to 2012. Having been raised in post-colonial Singapore and faced with pejorative racial stereotyping while studying abroad, he explores themes of racial and national identity, otherness, and multiculturalism through his hyper-racialized persona. Journey of a Yellow Man, number 11, Multiculturalism, is both performance documentation and artwork. This was performed during the Art Conference on Multiculturalism in Singapore at the Substation in 1997. At the conference, Lee Wen covered himself in yellow paint and presented a paper arguing against the prevailing conservatism in the Singapore's art scene. An overrepresentation of traditional art forms, such as Chinese painting, watercolor, and calligraphy, and most importantly, a striking disregard for performance art and installation. For his second act, Lee Wen arranged the character CMIO, representing Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, out of rice, and obliterated the letters. He then stripped to his briefs, curled into a bathtub, and washed his yellow color off. This moment is captured in the photograph. Finally, the performance ends with the artist handing bottles of yellow water from the bathtub to the audience, declaring, "Now I am a watercolorist too." All this was performed after the National Arts Council issued a harsh 10-year restriction on the funding and licensing of performance art in Singapore. Across the three acts of his performance, Lee Wen stays under the guise of the yellow man. His use of color simultaneously intrigues yet repulses us, creating clear visual contrast. between the artist, audience, and conference space. The fluorescent acid yellow is eye-catching, demanding the audience's undivided attention. Through this, the artist exaggerates his Chinese ethnicity, taking on the color yellow with all of its associations: jaundice, yellow peril, yellow face, hazard, vice, and, well, Chinese. Thus, the audience is forced to confront the walking paradox of a Chinese man masquerading as his own racial signifier and stereotype. Rather than suggesting a straightforward embrace of Chineseness, his performance of Chinese identity is ambiguous and playful. This ambivalence is further conveyed through the artist's washing off the color yellow, effectively shedding his Chinese identity and subverting the audience's expectation of a concrete embodiment of Chineseness. We see the yellow man is a costume with many faces. One moment he dons a comically racialized identity and criticizes it in the next. Perhaps this is one of the ways in which artists like Li Wen can turn institutional barriers into opportunity. In the artist's own words, the spotlight on Chinese art as part of the NAC organized event was an obsessive preoccupation with ethnicity, an underlying trait which is not only due to the ethnic Chinese majority, but also a new nation state to link itself historically to an immemorial past. Thus, through his satirizing of the yellow man, he rejects the sentiment of promoting and exhibiting only artworks that affirm the status quo in the name of multiculturalism at the expense of innovation and experimentation. Next, the medium of performance intervention is also significant. Commenting on the lack of performance art visibility, the artwork advocates its message through praxis. Li Wen inserts himself into the conversation, using his exposed and explicitly racialized body, which diffuses the boundary between artist and artwork by placing the body front and center. When the audience watches his protest, they are faced with a body and identity that challenges and disturbs them viscerally. The presence of a racialized body in public space, especially as part of performance art at the time, could only be relocated to the margins. Despite this, the very space in which the performance act is occurring, a public space surrounded by unassuming members of the public and authority figures alike, provides Li Wen a chance to mediate in the threshold, the liminal between the two. The yellow man engages with the authorities by assuming the panelist position in his first act, then convenes with the audience by distributing his symbolic bodily fluids in the form of yellow water. Nonetheless, he does not side with either the audience or the panel. His performance legitimizes itself by exposing the limits of a multiculturalist policy in the arts, in the gallery space, surprising the audience by defamiliarizing them with Chineseness. Professor Ray Langenbach comments on the social significance of performance art in Singapore. Performance art often operates between state and civil society, between public and private spaces, between appropriated speech, parody, mimicry, and reconstituted social rituals. This is to remind his audience and his panel of curators that performance art, as they are witnessing it, belongs to the conversation as much as calligraphy and watercolor paintings. The yellow man's call to action for the acceptance of varied artistic mediums and his complicated portrayal of artistic and Chinese identity remains imperative more than nearly 30 years on. In today's Singapore, where problems of ethnicity and racial inequality remain open secrets, Li Wen's performance exposes multiculturalism as a myth, a relic of a colonial past. His ambivalence may make you wonder. Is multiculturalism really as it seems? Thank you.